Hi everybody, Mr. Danielson from Seattle Prep here. We're going to be taking on a little bit of scripture interpretation, so let's take a look. We're titling this, And God Said, What? Coming from the book that we use for scripture at Seattle Prep called And God Said What? By Margaret Ralph. The topic is Biblical Interpretation and You, and we're going to use the wisdom of my first period sophomore scripture class who just cannot wait to read the book every day when they get a hold of it. So this is them looking all really super enthusiastic, at least most of them. So this is what we're talking about. Different views of the Bible, different images. When I did a search for Bible on the internet, I could not believe how many different images came up. And I think that's kind of what Bible interpretation is about. It's different images, it's different understandings, different perspectives. And the question is, how do we sort through all this to figure out what really is the best way to understand the Bible? So, luckily, we've got a good question here that was a part of the survey that you answered. And that question is, according to the Catholic Church, the individual Christian believer has the final word on how to interpret the Bible. And that was a true or false question, and I'll ask you to think about, do you remember what you put for that? Well, the right answer is, of course, true. And 60% of you and all the different schools did great on that. You got 60%, and you got it correct. But I'm going to put a big shiny if here because, so let's put that if at the end of the statement. The individual Christian has the final word on how to interpret the Bible if that person has educated himself or herself in what the church teaches. So, what does the church teach about this? So, to answer the question, how do we interpret? Vatican II gave us some really good guidelines, namely 3 different criteria for interpreting Scripture. Number 1, be especially attentive to the content and unity of the whole Scripture. Number 2, read the Scripture within the living tradition of the whole Church. And number 3, be attentive to the analogy of faith. So, let's take them one at a time. Starting with the first one, be especially attentive to the content and unity of the whole Scripture. You may say, what the heck does that mean? Well, what?
What? What? What?
What?
Yeah, what the heck? So, what the heck is unity of the whole? Well, let's think Harry Potter, for example. Harry Potter series is 7 books, and you cannot fully understand those books, 5, 6, and 7, without reading 1 and 2 and 3. They're a complex pattern of characters and settings and language, and really, although you could read number 7, you could not fully understand it without reading the previous books. And so if you think of the Bible in a similar way, it's 73 books. And although you could pull any one of those out and read it by itself, there is really a larger context. There's a whole that when you understand that whole, you have a better appreciation and understanding of the rest of it. So you cannot fully understand the Gospels without reading them in the context of the Old Testament and salvation history. Number 2, we need to read the Scripture within the living tradition of the whole church. So, what does living tradition mean? Let's take our example of Harry Potter again and understand the power of the tradition of great literature. So, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, you may have heard of Redwall or Goosebumps, Magic Tree House. When you think of the tradition of all this great literature, it's giving a perspective to understanding Harry Potter and how critics and families and teachers and readers all come to understand, interpret, and appreciate Harry Potter. So, That tradition provides writers, teachers, critics, and publishers with a understanding that they can share with each other. And that's what's great about reading a book with a group. You start with Chronicles of Narnia, you understand it partially, but then you talk to some teachers, you talk to some friends, you talk to some parents. You get more out of it when you're living out that story or understanding it in light of your family. So, let's take that to the Bible. So, there's a better understanding of the Bible through the tradition of choosing, preserving, inspired sacred scriptures. So, this long tradition of examining the events, the oral tradition, the written tradition, all it goes through before it becomes edited and finally canonical, that great tradition helps us understand the Bible. It today gives us teachers and theologians and religion teachers and scripture scholars, and they all contribute to the understanding and appreciation of the Bible. So that's what living tradition does. Helps us understand it by living in a community. So, finally, be attentive to the analogy of faith. So the analogy of faith is a word that helps us understand where truth is in different places within a text and how similar that can be. For example, Harry Potter's friendships are a reflection of our friendships. The literal magic potions and amazing wands and all the adventures he goes through is not exactly what our daily life is like. But you have to admit that when we see the power of friendship with him and his friends, we can relate to it in our own friendships. Ron's loyalty is phenomenal. And when we see that, it's a reflection of ourselves. We can be inspired of it and appreciate it for ourselves. Hermione's courage can inspire us in our own courage. So these truths are analogous to our own experiences. All those characters, although not real, have real values. And those truths are ones that we can transfer to our own life. And that's why these books are so popular, because we can relate to them so powerfully. Now, if we look at the truth in the Bible, there are many characters. So, for example, in the Old Testament, with the courage of Moses, we can say also is analogous to Peter's courage in the New Testament. These powerful leaders of our church, although living at different times, the truth of their courage is analogous. It's the same. Abraham's faith, Paul's faith, and the love of Jesus and the love of God are all connected. They're analogous. They're not exact. So in summary, how do we interpret? Well, there's 3 criteria that we just learned about. One is pay attention to the unity of the whole, read within the living tradition, and be attentive to the analogy of faith. So I hope this has been helpful in understanding how to interpret the Bible, and that's the end. So thanks for paying attention.